Well, hello. With this particular project, I'd like to demonstrate some techniques that can be used to create a bowl. I have in front of me here a piece of clay that's approximately 3.5 pounds. So this is going to create a bowl that's somewhat larger, say maybe a serving bowl size. I'm going to begin, as I always do, by preparing my clay and getting it stuck to the bat. I'm using a larger round bat that sits right over the bat pins on this particular wheel. So that fits nicely on there. I'll get my stool adjusted to the desired height, make sure my wheel is turned on, the power switch is on, and as I begin the process of coning and centering, got to do that with every piece. Just remember that. Every piece has got to be coned and centered. So as I work with this, a little bit of water, and I'm going to push downward to make sure that I've got this piece of clay stuck on that bat. I don't want the clay coming off. So as I work that, compressing it downward, my left arm, my elbow, is basically sitting on my pocket. My wheel speed here is about medium right now because I want to gain a little bit of an advantage over this piece of clay. It's not your 1.5 pound piece of clay. I mentioned it's about 3.5 pounds, so you want to make sure that it's not flying off the bat. So as I have that piece of clay compressed downward, I'll go ahead and ramp up my speed to full speed. Start my coning process. Again, just like I've done with anything that I cone and center. My left palm comes in at about 7 o'clock, my right fingertips at about 1 o'clock. And I'm making a nice clamp, a big C-clamp, if you will, out of my hands. My right thumb is positioned at the base of my left thumb. My fingertips squeeze in like a clamp right into the palm of my hand. If you were to look at my hands to see what's dirty, what actually gets contact with the clay, you would see that it's the fingertips of my right hand and the palm of my left hand. Now remember, with coning and centering, it does not have to be a really tall cone. And as I center that back downward with my left hand, my left thumb over the cone, my index finger, keeping the clay in instead of allowing it to mushroom out. A little bit of water for lubrication. And I can even use my right hand here as a little bit of leverage. Push that down, because it's not about the physical strength in my left arm. It's just using leverage, using your body mass when you work with a larger piece of clay. So this is a good sized piece of clay to think about using if one wanted to make a bowl that was about a good serving bowl size. So again, as we make a bowl, what I prefer to have as a bowl form for something that I'm starting, once I've got this coned and centered, I know that I'm making a bowl, so I like to have something that's a little bit wider at the base. And something that's shorter at the top. Remember, when we made cylinders, we wanted something smaller and taller. So with a bowl, I want something shorter and wider. So I'll get that in a form that I can work with. It's going to be relatively centered on the bat. I see still a little bit of wobble, so I just want to true that up a little bit. And there I have it. So now I have a piece of clay that I can work with. Go ahead and clean off my bat. Get rid of all that slip. Now, continuing by practice, I'm going to slow my wheel speed down to a slow to medium speed using my needle tool. I'm going to take the tip of the needle tool and I'm going to create a little circle or a target there, if you wanted to make it a target. Just a series of lines. Have a little fun with it. It's okay. I'd like to show you a variation on the technique that can be used to hole out your piece of clay. This is a little larger piece of clay, so this technique also works a little more effectively as well. With a larger piece of clay, I find it more effective to use 2 thumbs. You want to bring your thumbnails so they're touching, because the your thumbs is what's going to push down in the center. So as I begin, I've touched my thumbs together, placed them on the center of the clay, and that's inside that target, and I push down gently and create a little bowl form to start with. Okay, I'm going to anchor my elbows against my hips so that I stay firm and create a mass that I can work with. My fingertips are then going to gently grasp the clay. I'm not squeezing the clay with my fingers, I'm just holding it. And slowly, keeping my thumbs together, I'm going to push downward until I reach the depth that I desire for my thickness, which is going to be 3/8 to 1/2 inch. And once I've done that, I can go ahead and, just by good practice, I stop the wheel, stick my needle tool there in the middle, put my finger against it, and there I have my thickness. I can see it's a little bit more than 1/2 inch right now, so I'm going to open that up. I'm going to hole it out a little bit deeper. Push my thumbs down a little bit farther, in other words. I've done so by practice. There we are. And now I have a 1/2 inch thick base. This is a little bit larger bowl, so it's nice to have a little bit thicker base as well. So now I'm going to go back. I'm sealing up that hole. And here again I can use my thumbs. As I do this process of opening up the clay, I'm going to do so slowly as I push my thumbs outward. I'm moving my thumbs, the tip of my thumbs, parallel to the wheel head. I'm not going up and down. If I did so, I would have an uneven bottom of my pot. So as I move outwards with the tips of my thumbs, opening my thumbs out to the outer wall of my pot. A little water for lubrication. And in this process, I want to make sure that I'm not opening my hands outward so that I end up with the wall of my clay too far out before I'm ready to pull it up. So, I've gone a pretty fair distance there. Remember, this is an alternate technique of using your thumbs. I can still use my 2 fingers, my middle finger and my ring finger, and I can get that inside, and I find that to be a very effective method of finishing off the inside of my bowl, in this case, and compressing the clay. I'm gently moving back and forth across the bottom of my bowl to compress the clay that's there in the bottom. I want to make sure that I don't have clay coming apart on me. So, now I'm ready to do some pulling. In this process, I'd like to show you what it looks like to do the claw. I've heard this technique referenced with a couple of other potters, so I would like to show you what the claw looks like. It's a very effective technique when you're working with larger amounts of clay. What the claw amounts to is you have your fingers on the inside and your thumb on the outside. This is of your left hand, so it looks like the claw. You're going to gently grasp the clay, and I have a sponge with water in my right hand so I can keep that water for lubrication. My thumb is grabbing down here at the bottom. Okay, and my fingers are kind of opposite but a little bit higher. And as I pull that gently upward, I work to make sure that my thumb and fingers maintain the same space as I started with. I don't want to pinch, and as I move up, my thumb and my fingers are going to come right off the top of that wall. I want to go back, make a C, and compress that rim and clean up that loose clay. I'm going to check out and see how my shape is coming. Looks good so far. So I've moved a larger portion of clay, and now my wall is a little more uniform. You can see the thickness, and you can see the height that I've obtained just with that one pull using the claw. The claw technique is nice when you have a larger amount of clay that you want to pull upwards. Now, with a bowl, what is okay, remember with a cylinder, we tried to work up or slightly in. With a bowl, it's okay to come slightly outward. Don't get too crazy and go too far out at one time. You still have a lot of clay here, and you don't want the weight of that clay to collapse. So allow yourself to pull the clay upward before you begin opening it into the bowl form, which we'll do in a little moment here. So as I get back, now I'm going to make a couple of smaller pulls. I get back with my ring and middle finger of my right hand, making a little groove down there at the bottom, right against the back. I push in and make a little groove. My left thumb and middle finger. My middle finger is opposing the thumb on the inside. My thumb and middle finger provide a point of resistance and guide the clay upwards, as my right hand does most of the work. I lift it right off without pinching. I come back and make a little C and compress to get rid of the junk clay. So now we can see that I'm starting to come outward slightly, which sets me up for a bowl form. The idea is when you know you're making a bowl form, you're coming outward, you're opening it up. So it's okay to have that because you're saying, I'm not going to collar this back in and make it smaller. Once you've stretched out the clay, it's difficult to bring it back. So once you have clay that's in an open form like this, you want to continue to work in a form that is going to be open, such as a bowl. So making one more pull, I'm pulling upwards and slightly outwards. I get to the rim and I lift right off. I come back, make a C and compress ever so slightly, and I can see here that I have a nice shape to my bowl. Remember, this bowl is a serving bowl, so it's a little bit larger than a cereal bowl that you might otherwise eat out of. So you might consider leaving the wall a little bit thicker, all right? And that's actually a decent thickness for a serving bowl. It's got to be a little more durable, all right? So I'll consider that good at this point. What I'm going to do in advance is I'm going to take my wood modeling tool and I'm going to trim up some clay down here at the base to get rid of that. And I can go in from the top, and that reveals that clay. Clean off that little bit of scrap. Remember to hold your tool firmly when you do this. You don't want the clay getting a hold of your tool and causing you any further problems or anything you don't expect, you wouldn't want to happen. So make sure you hold on to that tool firmly as you're cleaning that up. I'm just going to trim that up a little bit there, and that looks pretty good. Now I might be able to trim that a little bit later on and actually put a foot ring on the bottom of this bowl. So now that I've finished pulling and cleaning up a little bit on the outside, now I need to incorporate what I like to use is a potter's rib. There are ribs of different shapes and sizes. There's your typical one that comes with a clay kit is a wooden potter's rib. This gives you a nice curvature to your bowl, and this particular one actually works just fine for this. So what I like to do is I like to hold my rib with two hands. I like to find the bottom of the rib and place that over a point where the wall of the pot and the base of the pot meet. And thus holding it with a curve, with an angle, I get to control the angle or the curvature of my wall of my bowl. You want to make sure that you have the tool wet when you do this. As I'm holding it with two hands, I like to lean over so I can see what's happening with my tool and the shape of my pot. And as I lower my rib downward, I can see how the rib is touching the wall of my pot, and I cleaned up a lot of loose clay there. Alright, and I can come back with my sponge and just kind of tighten that up a little bit again as well. And I've opened that and smoothed that up to a nice serving bowl size. I can say that if I'd like a little wider bowl, I can once again put that rib and just flatten out the angle a little bit. You can think of it this way: the flatter this edge is, the wider and shallower your bowl will become. The more vertical that edge is, obviously, the deeper and narrower your bowl will be. So, in that fashion, I'm going to flatten this out a little bit more. I have my rib wet. I'm actually going to put a little water on the inside of the bowl. And once again, starting from the top, starting from the rim, I'm working my way down. And you can see how the rib is contacting the wall of clay and making that bowl a little wider. You do not want to move too quickly. If you move slowly and methodically, you have the greater opportunity to get a bowl that you're going to be happy with. Alright, so I've opened that up a little bit more, and I could even do so a little bit more. A little bit at a time is always good. And I come back in again with my sponge and just kind of clean up that surface area so that I find that I have a nice, even surface on the inside of my bowl. Now, there are a lot of variations you can do. I prefer not to use the tip of my rib down inside, but if you do, make sure that you're holding that rib steady. You do not want to gouge the clay, and I would do so in a manner to compress the bottom of my bowl just to tighten up that surface down there and clean that up a little bit. Other than that, I don't like using the tip of the rib down on the inside of my bowls because there's too much that can happen. I come back in and I just kind of finish that up, clean up that rim a little bit, and I think respectively I've made a nice shaped bowl there. You can see on the outside I have a nice surface area and the inside is nice and clean. So that, in and of itself, I will prepare that for drying